Alright, in this video we're going to use a linear instancer of tubes to create a tunnel animation just like you saw at the beginning of this video. However, as we build this tunnel and as we start animating things, you can export that video at various points to give totally different effects to your animation. We'll start off with a smooth animation where we'll apply an animation to the camera inside of a null to make the tunnel twist and turn. Then we'll apply a bumpy ride to the animation of the camera by applying a motion parameter behavior. Yes, we can do that by converting a parameter behavior such as a wriggle. We can convert that to keyframes and then we can apply those parameters specifically to one object inside of MO2. Then to change the effect even more, we'll take those tubes, apply some slicing animations. That'll alter the final effect, and then finally we'll apply a modifier to that linear instancer and then we'll have a totally different animation there as well. You can pick up this project file over at my website www.bcraftmath.com/mo2. Bear in mind I am using a beta version of MO2, so the project may not load in the initial MO2 release. However, if you follow along with this tutorial, you should be able to create this relatively quickly. So getting started with MO2 loaded up in Motion, I have not changed anything yet. Let's go ahead and add a tube. So add, model, primitives, tube. Let's take this tube and make it a little bit shorter. So adjusting the height, we'll make it 0.25. These are just arbitrary numbers. Let's make the outer radius bigger, maybe somewhere around 2. Let's make the inner radius a little bit bigger, such as somewhere around 1.75. This is our ring. Now you could use a torus here, but I decided to go with the tube. Let's rotate this 90 degrees on the x-axis. Let me go ahead and activate MO2, the little menu bar up here. Let's switch over to perspective, zoom it on out. And what we want to do here is we want to create a linear instancer and we want to rotate these rings to create a full 360 degree tunnel. And to do that, I'm going to go to Add, Instancer, Linear. Let's throw that tube inside of that instancer, and by default it's going to create 5 of these pieces. If we go to our instancer and look at this, we have a count of 5 and it's changing the end position of the Z. Notice if I drag this, we can change that. Now I want to make that end position even farther away. I'm going to zoom out even more, and now we can see all 5 of those rings. I'm going to stay inside of my instancer and go down to the line twisting, and I'm going to take this twist Y, and this is going to rotate those rings around the Y axis. And I'm going to bring this all the way around to right at 360 or doggone close to it. We may have to go back and alter this a little bit in a few minutes, but for now that is good. Now you may say, oh, some of the rings disappeared. If we drag on our Z position and we make this not quite as negative, you will see all 5 come back into the picture. Now you may say there's only 4. Well, the reason why there's only 4 is because that 5th one is actually connected back to the first one. You can see it kind of connecting right up right there. And we'll come back and adjust that as needed right here in a moment. So setting that to 360. Let's go up to our instancer count and let's bump the count on up. And as you can see now, we are forming that tunnel. So I'm going to go ahead and put this up somewhere around, let's try 100. And then I'm going to adjust that end position on the Z to make it a little bit more negative so we can have a clear gap between all of our rings. Now I'm curious about where that first one and that last one are touching, so I'm going to take my perspective and I'm going to move over here close to where the first one and the last one are. And a way we can determine where exactly that is, I can scroll back down to my line twist and I'm just going to lower that degree a little bit. So notice if I rotate my perspective a little bit, it's right in here. Watch the rings connect as I lower this and raise this. So we can clearly see a gap now. So I'm going to take this one and position it to where it's pretty much equally spaced to create a uniform tunnel. So to do that, I'm going to raise up this degree, adjust my perspective so I can get a better view. So maybe somewhere right around there, give or take a little bit, but that's good enough. All right, so I'm going to rotate my perspective so I can get a good view of everything. And our camera is what we're ready to start working on now. So let's go to our camera. Let's reset its parameters. So having my camera selected, reset parameter. And now what we want to do is we want to take this camera and revolve it on the inside of this tunnel. Now we can't do that yet. If I try to rotate on Y, all it's going to do is turn the camera around inside of the tunnel. I don't want to do that. And to show you that the camera is inside of the tunnel, because I haven't changed the position, I did reset the camera's position, but the initial tube, its position was right in the center of the scene. That is important when we go to mess with our modifier a little bit later. But if I switch over to active, you can see that the camera is inside of that tunnel. Switching back to perspective, let's add a null. So add null. And this null that we have is actually, if I take its position and start dragging it, it's right there where the camera is, right in the center of the scene. Well, I don't want the null to be in the center of my scene. I want this null to be here in the middle of this tunnel. Now, that may be confusing the way I just said that, but I'm talking about right in here. So I don't want it in the tunnel. I want it in the center of this circular tunnel. So right around there where the mouse is. And a way to get that, first of all, I need to drag this null out of the instancer. I want to go back and select my instancer, and I'm going to go to its anchor point. I'm going to set the anchor point to center, and I want y'all to notice something that switches here. When I go to set center, notice something jumped right in the middle of the screen. So what happened here is this is going to be our center of this entire circle, so to speak, and I want to take note of this position here. Negative 8.97. I'm going to take my null and I'm going to apply that same X position. Now notice as I move to the left, the null is moving towards the center. And if I move it to the right, it's moving outside. But I want to put that right at negative 8.97. Now our null is in the center of this entire ring of rings or ring of tubes. Let's take the camera. Let's drop that inside of the null, and if we go to our null, watch what happens when I rotate on the y-axis. I want you to take note of this camera. It's going to start moving around on the inside here. So rotation on the y. It's rotating the null, and since the camera's inside of the null, the camera is going around and around as many times as we want inside of that tunnel. Resetting that. Let's switch over to active and see this inside of the tunnel. I still have my null selected, coming down to rotation Y. Now we are in our tunnel. Now to give this more of a tunnel effect, I think a good idea would be to add another tube inside of this instancer. I'm going to switch back to my perspective. I'm going to go to my tube. I'm going to apply a material, and I'm just going to do a basic surface one. Now I'm going to duplicate this tube. So now I have two tubes inside of my instancer, and I'm going to change this material to a basic surface. I think it is 8. Basic surface 8, a white one. And now what we have is an alternating pattern of black and white rings. Now to alter this pattern, if you don't want an alternating pattern here, let's go to our instancer and let's set the instance order, instead of iterate, set it to random. We can actually drag on this C to get a series of randomly ordered rings inside of this now. And if we switch back to active camera, let's make sure we have our null selected. And now if we adjust our Y rotation, now it does have more of a tunnel effect because it's random. It's not like alternating, it's not the same colors. And bearing this in mind, what you can do now, you can add multiple tubes inside of here, all with different materials to get even more variation in this tunnel. I'm going to add one more. I'm going to duplicate. I'm going to go to its material. And for its material, I'm going to go down to technical and I'm going to select motherboard. So now we have 3 different materials, this white, this black, and the motherboard. Now maybe you want to play around with the texture mapping of these to get a slightly different effect. I like the smaller pieces on my motherboard when I switched over to cubic. Going back to this white one here, you can see like little jagged lines. Let's switch that over to cubic as well. Now you probably can't see the pattern difference on the screen, but it definitely did change it. These little hexagons are much smaller versus what they were before. Feel free to play around with that. Let's switch back over to perspective. And now we have a totally random scene. We got a whole bunch of motherboards over here, and then we got some whites, but it's totally random. And again, you can go back to your instancer, adjust the seed of that random instance order, and you can get a whole bunch of different variations. So I'm happy with this one. Now I'm ready to rotate this camera, and a way to do that is to simply keyframe it. So let's go back to our null. I'm at the beginning of my project. I'm going to set the Y rotation to 0, and I've applied a keyframe. Scrolling to the end of my project, I'm going to apply, let's do 540 degrees. 540 degrees is going to take this camera and it's going to rotate it around this tunnel 1.5 times. So I'm going to scrub my playhead, notice the camera up there in the scene, and right around here, it's done 1 full revolution. What the camera just did, if you couldn't see it, it went all the way around, but we still have some more to go. It's going to go 1.5. So if I go all the way to the end, notice the camera's over here. It's done 1.5 revolutions. Now adjust your lighting and maybe you want to change your camera settings, but if we went ahead and exported this video now, it would be a smooth animation of a camera going through a tunnel made up of a linear instancer with various tubes with all sorts of materials applied to them. Now let's change things up a little bit. Instead of it being one continuous loop like you see here, let's apply some twists and turns to our tunnel. As a matter of fact though, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be applying some twists and turns to the camera. So I have my default camera selected. Now my rotation Z, if I drag on this, notice it appears that the tunnel was twisting, but it's actually the camera. There's the trick. So setting that back to 0, I'm going to apply a keyframe at the beginning of my project, and I'm going to come to the very end and maybe set it to around 720. So if I scrub the playhead now, it does appear that the tunnel is twisting and turning, and that's what the camera is doing inside of that tunnel. It's actually the camera's rotation that's changing and not the tunnel. If I switch back to perspective, you can see this as well. If I scrub the playhead, watch the actual camera rotate. The actual tunnel itself remains still the entire time. So if you watch that, you can see how the camera is rotating inside of the tunnel. And that's what gives the effect that we have a rotating or twisting and turning tunnel. So feel free to export that animation as well. But what I like to do is I like to come in here from my rotation Z, and I like to go to random spots and adjust the keyframe some so that we can get a different effect. And it's not just like one constantly looping thing, if that makes any sense. So I'm just coming in here, dragging my keyframes a little bit. And by us doing that, the camera's not just going to be rotating in a linear fashion. It's going to rotate, maybe kind of stay in its same position, and it's going to rotate some more. I mean, you can move these up and down. There's tons of things you can do here to give that effect. But yeah, there's our tunnel animation. Now, the camera is still smooth inside of this tunnel. Let's apply some bumpiness to the camera. So with the camera selected, I'm going to go to its Y rotation. And with the Y rotation, notice I can kind of look left and right inside of the tunnel. Now, if we could move this back and forth quickly by keyframing or something, that would be great to kind of give it a bumpy ride. You could even apply it to the X and the Y at the same time if you wanted to, but just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to show you how we can do it to the rotation Y. So for this rotation Y, I'm going to click on this arrow over here. I'm going to add a parameter behavior, and I'm going to add wriggle. Now, what MO2 does, notice for this wriggle, MO2 basic rotation Y. It's going to apply this to anything that has a basic rotation Y, and we don't want that to happen. But for now, how much do we want to fluctuate our degrees? How about just 1 degree above or 1 degree below? If you make this too extreme, the camera's just going to be shaking all over the place. But it's going to bump back and forth, and I'm going to set that amount to 1 degree, and I want to add and subtract. This should allow it to look some left and look some right, kind of giving a bumpy effect. And you can kind of see the wave form down here of this wriggle. If I bump up the frequency, it's going to make it more frequent, so the wriggle is going to happen more often. And you can see as I drag that, the wave is changing down here in our keyframes. So I'm going to set it to somewhere maybe around 5. Now, if it does go away as you're dragging around on this thing, no big deal. We can go back and fine tune this right here in a second. But I have my frequency set to 5. I'm not going to play around with any of these other settings right now. But notice it says apply to object.mo2.basic.rotation-y. If I were to go to my null or my instancer or any of these, I want you to notice what's going to happen. Now, the only thing I want this wriggle to apply to is the default camera's Y rotation. But let me come to the instancer. So I'm in my instancer, rotation Y, we have that gear icon. Let me move my mouse off of there, but you see that gear icon? The same wriggle is applied to that. As a matter of fact, if I come to anything that has a basic rotation Y, you're going to see that gear icon because that's what that wriggle is applied to right there. Hope you see that. So here's the fix for that. I'm going to go to my default camera. Now we can see our waveform back over here. And I'm going to tap on basic rotation Y, making sure I have my camera selected. And I'm going to hold Command and tap K. It's going to give you the option to take all of this junk and we're going to convert it to keyframes. Now, if you don't see the keyframes over here, I'm going to come back to this rotation Y and I'm going to down click on this arrow again and I'm going to click on Show in Keyframe Editor. So here is our wriggle effect. And if I scrub the playhead, you can kind of see it's got more of a bumpiness to it versus that smooth animation that we saw at the beginning. If you don't like that, you can just highlight all this stuff, or you can right click right here and go to Reset Parameter and it gets rid of that. But if you like that bumpiness to kind of take away that smoothness, then leave it there. If it's a little bit too much, then what you're going to have to do is re-add that wriggle. But let me show you now that we've done that we've converted that wriggle to keyframes. If I come back to all these other places and I look at basic, rotation Y, we don't have that gear icon anymore. The wriggle is gone because we applied those keyframes directly to the default camera for the rotation Y. So here we have another effect that you could export as a movie, and this is given a different effect versus the smooth animation that we had a moment ago. Now let's take this one step further. I'm going to switch to perspective. I'm going to delete two tubes that I have in here, keeping just one. And for this one tube, I'm going to scroll down to its settings. Underneath primitive settings, let's go to slice. Let's enable the slice. And I'm going to set this. Notice if I do this right here. Basically what we can do is we can create this ring and we can keyframe this as well. And as a matter of fact, that's exactly what I want to do. I'm going to start it at 0. I'm going to keyframe it. And then maybe somewhere around here, I'm just picking something totally random. I want it to be totally constructed. So I need to set this around to 360. And the reason I deleted those other two tubes is now, since I've applied this keyframed animation to the slices, I can copy and paste this tube and I'll have those keyframes there as well. So I'm just going to duplicate this, apply a different material, back to my basic surface one. We have our random effect of rings getting organized up here, and let's duplicate it one more time and let's add that other material, the motherboard. Now, if I scrub the playhead, it still looks uniform, right? So, I mean, let's go play this, or let's scrub it from the active camera. It's going to have a nice effect to it. So you're seeing the tunnel getting constructed as the camera is going through this in a bumpy fashion because I still have that wriggle applied to the animation. Again, you can get rid of that if you wanted to, if you rather have it smooth. But here's what I want to happen. I want to take a modifier and I want these rings to get constructed in a 360-degree fashion, but as they're getting constructed, I want them to be going crazy. I want them to be rotating around that tunnel loop, if this makes any sense. The best way to show you that, I'm going to switch to perspective. With my instancer selected, I'm going to add a modifier. So instancer, modifier, and let's do a noise. Now, for this noise modifier here, I'm going to change some things that are automatically created for me. The first thing I'm going to change is the modify scale. Global scale is set to 0. I don't want to change the size. You may have noticed those pieces there got smaller. Let me undo that so you can see that. With the modify scale set, it's changing the scale of these rings, and the only reason why these are the ones that are changing is because of where my modifier is. A quick way to fix that is to go to our shape settings and set it to infinite. Now it's modifying the scale of every single one of these. And if I scrub my playhead, you can clearly see the scale is changing quite a bit. But that's not what I want. So with my global scale set to 0, now if I scrub the playhead, nothing's happening except for the rings getting constructed based off of that slice keyframe. If we go to modify rotation and we set this, I'm just going to set it somewhere around 180. And now, as I scrub this, what's happening is those rings are getting constructed of the slice, and the modifier is modifying the rotation. Now this animation here is totally different than what we started off with at the beginning of this tutorial, where we just had some white rings, then we made some black rings, then we made some random pieces, we looped the tunnel, we gave it some bumpiness with the wriggle. All of this stuff applied now with a modifier. If we scrub this playhead with the active camera, you're going to see a totally different effect. I like the bumpiness. Maybe it's a little bit too bumpy, but the thing is here, I mean, we got rotating pieces going everywhere. And you may notice here, once the tunnel's constructed, the things are still rotating because that modifier is still getting applied. Do you see that? Watch, you know, this ring here and this ring here. The motherboard ones, you can see the tunnel's complete, yet that modifier is still rotating those pieces to the tunnel. So maybe I want to take that away somewhere, maybe way out here. Probably not a good idea because you can still see the rings aren't done getting constructed. So maybe somewhere right around here. It looks like the rings are done. The 360-degree slice is complete. So what we can do here is we can go to this modifier. With the modifier selected, I'm going to add a keyframe here, and I actually want it to be not visible. So that's going to fix all those rotations. Make it visible. And now we have the modifier getting applied because it is visible. And as I keep dragging, somewhere in here, you're going to see this check mark go away. I'm going to scrub real slow so you can see this. So right in there is where the modifier goes from being visible to not visible, and now we don't have those rotating pieces anymore. And as you can see, you can get really carried away with all these various things you can do to this tunnel. And there you have it, a linear instancer tunnel with some parameter behaviors applied to it, the wriggle where we converted to keyframes. We also applied a modifier to the linear instancer, which made the rings rotate. We also applied an animation to the slice of each individual tube. And in the end result, you get a totally different animation than what it was when we first started creating this tunnel. And that's it for this video. I hope it helped.